The first warning came taped to my gate at sunrise, and the tone made it clear this wasn't a request. It was a bright red notice stamped with HOA letterhead, demanding I unlock the private gate immediately or face escalating fines. According to them, my gate was blocking community access. What they conveniently ignored was the fact that the road behind that gate had never been community property to begin with. This story is a fictional narrative, inspired by common HOA dispute themes, not real events or real people. I'd installed the gate months earlier, right after buying the narrow stretch of gravel road that cut through my land. The purchase was legal, documented, and boringly official. No drama until the HOA decided inconvenience counted as authority. The road led to several newer homes tucked behind my property. For years, residents had used it freely, assuming access meant ownership. Assumptions have a way of collapsing when paperwork enters the conversation. The HOA president, a woman named Marla Vance in this fictional account, didn't call or knock. She escalated straight to enforcement language. Fines, deadlines, threats of towing. The letter read like it had been copied from a playbook rather than written with any understanding of the land itself. I walked the road that morning, gravel crunching under my boots, and checked the gate twice. Solid, locked, legal. By noon, the emails started. This gate violates community standards. You are interfering with emergency access. Failure to comply will result in penalties. Each message assumed I was bluffing. What they didn't know, what no one seemed to ask, was why I bought that road in the first place. Years earlier, when the development expanded, survey lines were rushed. Old access easements were referenced loosely. The road sat in a gray zone until the owner offered it for sale. I bought it quietly, not to block anyone, but to protect my property from exactly this kind of overreach. The HOA didn't see protection. They saw defiance. That afternoon, a patrol vehicle rolled up and stopped inches from the gate. Two board members stood there with clipboards, taking photos like documentation alone could create authority. They told me the gate had to come down by the end of the week. I asked a simple question. Can you show me where this road belongs to the HOA? They couldn't. Instead, they told me I was being difficult. That's usually the moment when disputes turn loud. I stayed quiet. I went inside, opened a folder I hadn't touched in months, and reviewed the purchase agreement, the recorded deed, and the access maps that showed exactly where their authority ended. The gate wasn't the problem. It was the reminder they didn't control everything. And once the HOA realized the lock wasn't coming off, their next move changed the situation in a way none of us expected. By the next morning, the HOA stopped asking and started acting like they already owned the road. Another notice appeared on my gate, this one more aggressive than the first. Same letterhead, heavier language. It claimed the road was a shared access route and that my lock posed a liability risk. The phrasing was confident, almost rehearsed, as if repeating it enough times might make it true. Again, this remains a fictional story created for entertainment and storytelling purposes only. I didn't respond right away. That silence seemed to irritate them more than resistance ever could. Within hours, my phone buzzed nonstop. Voicemails, emails. One message even suggested the HOA would authorize removal of the obstruction if I didn't comply. Obstruction. That word kept coming up. What they were really obstructed by was the fact that the road purchase had been finalized months earlier, recorded cleanly, and transferred without any easement obligations. No shared access clauses. No emergency carve-outs, just a private road, mine. That afternoon, a group of residents gathered at the far end of the gate, not angry, confused. They'd been told the HOA had everything handled, and that I was refusing to cooperate. I stepped outside and explained calmly that the road wasn't community property anymore. Some believed me immediately. Others looked uncomfortable, like this wasn't the version they'd been given. Later that day, the HOA president, Marla in this fictional account, finally showed up in person, clipboard in hand, confident smile. She explained how opening the gate would restore harmony and avoid unnecessary conflict. I asked her again, politely, to show me any document proving HOA ownership or access rights. She changed tactics. Now it was about safety, fire trucks, ambulances, hypothetical emergencies that somehow hadn't been an issue for years. I listened, nodded, and then asked whether the HOA had ever maintained the road, paid taxes on it, insured it. She didn't answer. Instead, she warned me about fines escalating daily. Leon threats were mentioned casually, like weather forecasts. That was when I realized this wasn't about access, it was about control. The gate wasn't blocking traffic. It was blocking authority. That evening, I sent a single email to my attorney with copies of every notice, message, and threat. I didn't CC the HOA. I didn't argue back. I let the paperwork do what arguments never could. Because once an HOA starts asserting rights it doesn't have, the problem stops being a gate dispute. It becomes a liability problem. And when the HOA decided to test how far they could push without proof, the situation escalated faster than anyone anticipated. The lock held, but the pressure didn't, and that's when the HOA made their first real mistake. 2 days after the threats, I came home to find fresh tire marks along the gravel road leading up to my gate. The lock was scratched. Not broken, just tested. That detail mattered. It meant someone had tried to see how far intimidation could go without crossing a clear line. This remains a fictional narrative created for storytelling and entertainment, not a claim of real events. By mid-morning, orange notices appeared on nearby utility poles, warning of restricted access changes. They weren't official notices. No seals, no permits, just printed fear dressed up as authority. The HOA was trying to condition people before facts had time to surface. Then the patrol showed up. A private security vehicle idled at the gate while 2 HOA representatives stood beside it, taking photos and jotting notes like they were documenting a violation. One of them loudly mentioned calling for a tow truck if compliance wasn't immediate. I stepped outside and asked them to leave my property. They didn't. Instead, they insisted the road fell under HOA jurisdiction and that I was refusing lawful access. I asked them once again to show proof. They said they didn't have it with them, but assured me it existed. That's when I stopped engaging. I turned around, walked back inside, and called the county recorder's office. 10 minutes later, I had digital copies of the deed transfer and survey overlays emailed directly to me. Clear lines, clear ownership, clear absence of any HOA rights. The HOA didn't expect me to respond with documentation. They expected compliance. That afternoon, residents began sharing rumors. Some were told the gate would be removed by order. Others heard I was planning to charge tolls. None of it came from me. All of it came from the same source. Disinformation spreads fastest when no one checks it. By evening, the HOA president sent a final message. Short, firm. It stated the board would take necessary action within 48 hours to restore access. No legal citation. No reference numbers, just authority by assertion. I replied with one sentence. Please direct all future communication regarding the road to my legal representative. The response was immediate and emotional. Accusations, insults, claims of selfishness. Suddenly, I wasn't a homeowner, I was an obstacle. The tone shift confirmed everything I suspected. This wasn't about access. It was about losing control in front of an audience. I saved every message, every notice, every photo. Because once someone starts bluffing about rights they don't have, the smartest move isn't to argue. It's to let them prove it, or fail trying. And when the HOA realized intimidation wasn't working, they made a move that forced the truth into the open. The moment the HOA stopped messaging and went quiet, I knew they were planning something louder. Silence in disputes like this isn't peace, it's preparation. For nearly a full day, there were no emails, no notices, no drive-bys. Then, just before dusk, I heard engines on the far side of the gate. This remains a fictional story, written for entertainment and narrative purposes only. A flatbed truck pulled up, followed by a private security vehicle. Two HOA board members stepped out wearing expressions that suggested they believed the situation was already settled. One of them held paperwork. The other carried bolt cutters. They announced they were authorized to remove the gate. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I asked them to stop and leave my property. They refused, claiming emergency authority granted by the board. No police, no court order, just confidence. That's when I made the call. Within minutes, a county officer arrived, not to enforce HOA rules, but to keep the peace. I handed him copies of the deed, the survey, and the road purchase agreement. He read quietly, asked a few clarifying questions, then turned to the board members and told them something they clearly weren't expecting. This was private property. They were trespassing. The bolt cutters went back in the truck. The board members protested, insisting the HOA had relied on long-standing use and community expectation. The officer explained, politely but firmly, that expectation doesn't override ownership. Use doesn't equal rights. And authority doesn't come from letterhead. The flatbed left, so did the security vehicle. But the damage wasn't undone. Neighbors had watched the whole thing. Phones were out. Questions were forming. People who had trusted the HOA's version of events were now seeing how thin it was. That night, the HOA sent a mass email claiming there had been a misunderstanding and that no action had been taken. It blamed conflicting records and asked for patience while the issue was reviewed internally. No apology, no acknowledgement, just retreat. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the incident report number to my attorney and added it to the growing file. Because the issue was no longer just about a gate or a road. It was about attempted self-help enforcement, and that's where HOAs cross from nuisance into liability. The next morning, a new notice appeared, this time not from the HOA, but from the county. It confirmed the road's private status and warned against unauthorized interference. That paper changed everything. And once the HOA realized the county was now watching, their strategy shifted in a way that revealed what they'd really been trying to protect. The county notice didn't just stop the HOA, it exposed something they'd been quietly hiding. Within hours of that paper circulating, the HOA's tone changed again. No more threats, no more deadlines. Instead, I received a carefully worded message inviting me to a resolution discussion. The language was softer, almost friendly, like the previous week hadn't happened. This remains a fictional narrative created solely for storytelling and entertainment. The meeting was scheduled for the next evening at the community hall. I didn't go alone. I brought copies, lots of them, deeds, surveys, emails. The incident report. A clean, chronological stack that told the story without emotion. The room was fuller than usual. Neighbors who'd never attended HOA meetings before were there, whispering, comparing notes. People had questions now, real ones. The HOA president, Marla, in this fictional account, opened with a speech about community unity and unfortunate confusion. She avoided specifics, hoping tone could replace facts. Then she suggested a compromise. The gate could stay, but I'd provide keys to the HOA for emergency access. That was the tell. I asked a simple question. Can you show any document granting the HOA access rights to that road? She deflected. Talked about expectations, about safety, about how the road had always been used by residents. I waited until she finished, then laid the documents on the table, slowly, deliberately. I explained, calmly, that the road had been purchased cleanly, without easements, and that the county had already confirmed its private status. I added that the attempted removal of the gate had been documented. The room went quiet. Then someone asked why the HOA had claimed ownership if it didn't exist. Another asked why fines had been threatened. A third asked whether the HOA had the authority to place liens based on property it didn't own. Those questions didn't come from me. They came from people who suddenly realized they might have been misled. Marla tried to regain control. She suggested the HOA had been advised incorrectly and promised a full review. But the confidence was gone. What remained was damage control. After the meeting, several residents approached me privately. Some apologized. Others admitted they'd been pressured to complain about the gate. One mentioned that the HOA had future plans for the road that never made it into official minutes. That was the first time I understood this wasn't just about access. The road mattered because it sat at the center of something larger, something that couldn't move forward while it stayed private. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't speculate out loud. I just documented what I heard and added it to the file. Because when authority starts inventing rights, it's usually to clear obstacles, not to protect people. And once I understood why the road mattered so much to them, the next move became painfully predictable. The next move didn't come with a notice or a meeting. It came quietly, the way risky decisions usually do. For a few days after the community meeting, everything seemed calm. No emails, no patrols, no flyers. On the surface, it looked like the HOA had finally accepted reality. But calm without closure is rarely genuine. This is still a fictional story, created purely for narrative purposes and not meant to represent real events or real people. Late one evening, a neighbor messaged me asking why construction markers had appeared near the far end of the road. That caught my attention. I walked down with a flashlight and found fresh stakes pushed into the ground, each tagged with colored tape. No permits posted, no contractor information, just markers placed quietly like they hoped no one would ask questions. I took photos, wide shots, close-ups, timestamps included. The next morning I checked county permit records. Nothing, no applications, no approvals, no right-of-way requests, which meant someone was planning ahead without permission. By midday, I received an email from the HOA claiming the markers were part of a future safety assessment and didn't require notice. The wording was careful, vague, non-committal. That email went straight to my attorney. Within hours, I learned something important. The HOA had been exploring a reclassification of the road. If successful, it would have allowed them to argue implied access rights, despite lacking ownership. It was a long shot, a risky one, and it only worked if no one objected early. That's why the gate bothered them so much. It made the road visible again. I sent a formal cease and desist notice regarding unauthorized surveying on private property. Polite, direct. Documented, the response was immediate and defensive. They claimed no surveying had taken place, claimed the markers were temporary, claimed misunderstandings again. But misunderstandings don't leave stakes in the ground. That evening the markers were gone, so were the emails. The silence returned, but this time it felt different, less confident, more cautious. like someone had realized they'd stepped too close to something that could unravel everything if pulled too hard. Neighbors started asking questions on their own, about dues, about authority, about where HOA power actually began and ended. Once those questions start circulating, control becomes fragile. I didn't celebrate. I just stayed consistent. The gate stayed locked. The documentation stayed organized, and every interaction stayed calm. Because at this point, the issue wasn't whether the HOA could force the gate open. It was whether they could explain why they'd tried so hard to pretend they could. And when the explanation finally surfaced, it revealed intentions far bigger than a locked gate ever suggested. The explanation didn't arrive as an apology. It surfaced through paperwork that was never meant to be seen. A resident I barely knew stopped me one afternoon near the mailbox cluster. Quiet voice, careful words. She said she'd overheard a conversation during a closed HOA session about future access upgrades and developer coordination. None of that language had appeared in public meetings. This remains a fictional narrative, written for storytelling only and not based on real people or events. That night, I reviewed every HOA newsletter, agenda, and summary from the past 2 years. Buried in vague phrases were hints of something bigger: feasibility studies, traffic assessments, references to potential connectivity. Nothing explicit, but enough to suggest long-term planning that went far beyond maintaining a neighborhood. The road mattered because it connected directly to a larger paved route. If it ever became classified as shared access, it would open the door, literally, to expansion. More homes, more traffic, more dues, more control. And my gate sat right in the middle of that plan. The next HOA communication confirmed it without saying it outright. A message went out announcing a special committee to explore infrastructure opportunities. Membership was limited. Meetings were closed. Transparency was nowhere to be found. I didn't respond publicly. Instead, I requested records, meeting minutes, consultant invoices, communications referencing the road. Under the association's own bylaws, those documents were available to members upon request. The HOA delayed, asked for time, asked for clarification, then finally produced a partial release. What was missing mattered more than what was included. Invoices referenced consultations that didn't appear in minutes. Email headers showed correspondence with outside entities that weren't disclosed. And one memo referred to anticipated resistance from current landholder. That was me. I forwarded everything to my attorney and to a local property rights advisor. The response was swift and clear. The HOA was skating dangerously close to misrepresentation. Not criminal, but actionable, especially given the earlier threats, attempted gate removal, and unauthorized marking. The pressure shifted again, this time internally. Residents began asking why committees were closed, why consultants were hired without votes, why access assumptions were being made about land the HOA didn't own. The HOA president's responses grew shorter, less polished, more defensive. Then came the resignation notice, brief, no explanation, just a statement that leadership would transition pending review. The board scheduled a new meeting open this time. Agendas were revised, language softened. Control was slipping, not because I forced it, but because truth doesn't stay hidden once it's documented. The gate never moved, but the narrative did. And when leadership changed, the consequences didn't stop at policy. They reached into decisions that could never be undone quietly. Leadership changed quietly, but the consequences landed loud. Within a week of the resignation, the HOA's entire posture shifted. The new interim board released a carefully worded update claiming they were reassessing prior actions and pausing all infrastructure discussions. It sounded responsible on the surface, but to anyone paying attention, it read like damage control. This remains a fully fictional story, created for narrative purposes only and not meant to reflect real people or real events. What mattered more than the announcement were the actions that followed. Consultants stopped appearing around the neighborhood. The special committee vanished without explanation. And most importantly, the HOA formally withdrew every notice, fine, and warning related to my gate and the road. No apology, just erasure. Then came the letters. One by one, residents received clarification notices stating that the road behind my gate was private property and not subject to HOA authority. The same people who'd been told I was obstructing access were now being told access had never been guaranteed in the first place. That reversal didn't go unnoticed. Neighbors started comparing what they'd been told over the years with what was now being admitted. Some were frustrated, others were angry, a few felt embarrassed. But all of them began asking the same question: what else had the HOA been overstating? I didn't fuel it. I didn't need to. At the next open meeting, residents raised concerns I'd never mentioned publicly. Consultant spending, closed-door sessions, claims about shared infrastructure that were never supported by documents. The board listened, took notes, promised transparency. Whether they meant it or not, the shift was irreversible. The road was officially removed from every HOA map, planning document, and community guideline. Any reference to shared access disappeared. The gate became just another boundary, visible, boring, and unquestioned. And that was the real outcome. Not victory, not revenge, clarity. A week later, I received confirmation that the HOA had formally abandoned any claim related to the road. It was brief, clinical, final. I filed it away with the rest. The gate stayed closed, not as a symbol of defiance, but as a reminder that ownership doesn't need permission to exist. It just needs to be respected. What surprised me most wasn't how far the HOA had pushed. It was how quickly everything unraveled once the assumptions were challenged. And just when it seemed like the issue was finally settled, one last decision ensured it would never resurface again. The final decision wasn't dramatic, but it made sure the gate would never be questioned again. A month after the HOA formally backed off, I finalized something I'd been considering since the first notice showed up on my gate. Quietly, methodically, with paperwork that left no room for interpretation. This is a fictional story written for narrative and entertainment purposes only. The road wasn't just private anymore. It was permanently defined as such. I worked with the county to record an updated boundary clarification and access designation. No new restrictions, no penalties, just precision. The kind that survives leadership changes, reinterpretations, and future committees. Once it was filed, there was nothing left to debate. The HOA acknowledged the update in a short community bulletin. One paragraph, no commentary, no framing. Just a statement that access to the road was not included in community amenities and should not be assumed. That single paragraph did what weeks of arguing never could. Life settled into something normal again. The gate stayed closed. Residents adjusted routes. Complaints faded into routine. The road stopped being a point of tension and returned to being what it always was, a stretch of gravel with a lock and an owner. What surprised me most was how quickly the neighborhood adapted once clarity replaced confusion. People don't actually like conflict, they like certainty. Once they had it, the drama evaporated. Occasionally, someone would ask why the gate stayed locked. I always answered the same way. Because that's how the property is defined. No emotion, no story, just fact. The HOA stopped mentioning the road entirely. New leadership focused on landscaping budgets, pool maintenance, and seasonal events, the kind of responsibilities they were meant to handle. No more overreach. No more assumptions disguised as authority. I didn't attend meetings anymore. I didn't need to. The lesson had already landed. Power without proof collapses the moment someone asks for documentation. The gate didn't change anything. It revealed everything. And while nothing prevents future boards from testing boundaries again, the record now speaks louder than any notice ever could. Anyone who tries will have to start with the truth, not convenience. That's the real permanence. Not a lock, not a sign, but clarity that can't be rewritten. And in the end, closing the gate didn't shut people out, it closed the chapter for good. What stayed with me wasn't the gate. It was how quickly certainty replaced conflict once the truth was written down. This closing chapter, like the rest, is a fictional story meant for entertainment and storytelling, not a claim about real events or real people. Months later, the gate blended into the landscape the way fences and property lines always do when they're respected. No warnings, no notices, no patrols slowing down to stare. The road existed quietly, defined clearly, and left alone. That was the real win, not silence, but stability. The HOA moved on. New leadership, new priorities, fewer assumptions. Meetings focused on maintenance instead of enforcement. Residents adjusted routes without complaint. Life did what it usually does once tension leaves, it normalized. I didn't reopen the gate. I didn't need to. It wasn't about exclusion. It was about definition. Once something is properly defined, it stops inviting arguments. Every now and then, someone new to the neighborhood would ask about the road. I'd explain calmly that it was private property and always had been. No history lesson, no dramatics, just clarity. Most nodded and moved on. People rarely push back against facts when they're presented without emotion. Looking back, the most surprising part wasn't the HOA's overreach. It was how easily authority can exist on assumption alone. For a long time, no one questioned it because no one thought to. The gate forced the question. The paperwork answered it. That's the lesson I took from all of this. You don't need to fight louder. You don't need to threaten back. You just need to know where you stand and be willing to prove it. Boundaries matter. Not because they divide people, but because they prevent confusion from becoming conflict. When lines are clear, expectations follow. And when expectations are honest, communities work better. The road didn't change. The understanding did. And that made all the difference. Sometimes the strongest move isn't opening a gate. It's closing the argument forever. If you enjoyed this story and want more fictional HOA conflicts, property disputes, and calm wins through clarity, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Like the video, comment your thoughts, and tell me, have you ever dealt with an HOA that overstepped? Thanks for watching.